go. Everybody, welcome to Power Hour. I am Joelle Jobson. I am going to be leading our session today. Laura is in the chat, so go over to our Teams chat, and you can, have some discussions as we kind of talk through this topic today. And as far as the Teams chat is concerned, you can, if you are not already in there, you can, in the description of this video, there's a link for you to fill out a form so we can invite you and get you in there for our next session, more than likely. If Laura sees any of the requests or any of our team sees the request, then they'll try to put you in there during this session. But if not, you'll definitely be in there for the next one. So welcome, everybody. This is SharePoint Power Hour. We do this every week, most weeks, Wednesdays at 11 Central, 12 Eastern. We are really happy to have you here today. And our topic today is SharePoint versus Teams. So, the whole concept of this actually came from a request that we had from someone in our company chat. And they were kind of just asking about, I think they were kind of thinking of it as it's one or the other. And we've seen that a lot. And just in when we've worked with companies, when we've trained people, there does seem to be, especially maybe with end users, maybe even with power users sometimes, there tends to be this idea that it's like one or the other, like it's like SharePoint versus Teams, and we kind of thought that was an interesting topic and wanted to dive into that a little bit today. And I'm gonna have to put in a GIF here for us. Let's see if there's a good fight GIF going on. Let's see. Yeah, I think this one will work. No, actually, maybe not. Let's see. Sorry. You're watching me looking for GIFs. Riveting content, guys. Riveting content. All right, I'll let somebody else do it. Because I can't find a good one. I'll try one more time. Okay. All right, there we go. This will work. Cats! Yeah, there we go. All right. So Valerie said, is this file in, a person will ask, is this file in Teams or SharePoint? And her answer is yes. It's true. That is very accurate. All right, let me go ahead and flip over to my desktop screen share here. And we'll get into this a little bit. I need to make sure, I'm just going to make sure I have no way for anybody to tell me how things are looking, so I just want to make sure that you guys can actually see that screen. Just because it's been a minute since I used that. Yeah, I'll give it a sec, but you guys just let me know if you don't see the screen share momentarily. Alright, it looks like it is up now, maybe. Are you guys not seeing that? Hold on. Alright, let me try again. Sorry. Is it not doing my screen? Bear with me 1 second. Just gotta... Whoa, infinite. Let's see if that works now. Give it a second to catch up so I can see. Yeah, I'm working on it. Trying to see if it will actually catch up so you guys will see it. Yeah, you're going to see my infinity screen, and then there we go. Okay. It's caught up now. All right, so SharePoint versus Teams. Now we're finally in there. So SharePoint versus Teams, what is the thing here? So, are they truly rivals? Are we actually looking at this as one technology versus another? And the answer is no. Really, they aren't rivals. Despite some confusion amongst end users, they really do have specific functions. And it's probably better to, we're kind of going to talk about this, but it's probably better to look at, the function differences than the technology itself. Because it's not just, all inclusive, right? So, you might have, in specific situations, you might have need for Teams. In specific situations, you might have need for SharePoint. And one company could be different from the other. One company might use something and do something in Teams that the other company is doing in SharePoint. So it's really kind of open-ended. And we're going to talk a little bit about best practices and then just some of the things around, what the differences are and when, one is, better than the other. And they're also much more integrated than you may realize. So if you're kind of new to this topic, obviously, again, I know some of my veterans probably know a little bit of this information. But they are, a lot more connected and integrated than you may think they are. So I kind of like to look at things a little bit more functionally. So my functions that I kind of split things into, and I do this a lot just with my projects with these tools is, excuse me, intranet and communication being one function, and then team and project collaboration being another function. And the technology, so on the intranet and communication side, typically the most popular thing that we're gonna utilize for intranet and for communication are the SharePoint communication sites. So the SharePoint communication sites are just a type of site that you can create in SharePoint. That is typically going to be what you use for your intranet, and then again for any kind of communication news and things like that you're pushing out across your org or within a department or something like that. The one thing to note with that though is that Teams also has ways of doing communication, I would say, more than anything. We're going to talk a little bit about Viva Connections later. Really, the funny thing about Viva Connections is it's really just showing your SharePoint communication site in Teams. It's not actually it's not like you have an intranet in Teams. It's literally just, let me show and be able to work with my SharePoint communication site or SharePoint home site within Microsoft Teams. You also have an option for an org-wide team, so a team that everybody in the organization can access. So you can do communications there as well. And then a cross-channel announcement is another option too. Those are just a few different ways that you can do kind of different types of communication inside of Teams. But overall, your intranet most likely, in 99% of the situations I find, is going to be in SharePoint on a communication site. Where on the other side, which is what we're going to really focus on today, is team and project collaboration. And so the most popular, best option is Microsoft Teams for that type of thing. And where people get confused when you're in SharePoint, you do see that there are two site types. There's a communication site and a team site. But the biggest thing to understand, and we'll talk more about this, is that the SharePoint team site is created every time a team in Microsoft Teams is created. Sorry, I'm going to have to take some water sips here. So the SharePoint team site is pretty much connected into Microsoft Teams. And we're going to talk in more detail about that because I know that's probably one of the most confusing things for users. And with that SharePoint team site may actually not really need to be used directly. So people may not ever need to access that SharePoint team site directly, like from your navigation or within SharePoint. They may just end up doing everything that they need to do in Microsoft Teams, and then never actually access that SharePoint team site. But we'll talk about use cases for when they might. So then usage, and when we're kind of breaking down these two things. So intranet and communication, these are only a few owners and editors. So it's only when you have a handful of people, maybe like 2 owners and a couple editors. But most people that are accessing the content are readers or visitors. So that's kind of when that kind of like keys off that's probably going to be an intranet or communication site. It's going to keep the entire company engaged and updated on news, events, forums, and other important content. So it's like typically that company-wide information. And then a lot of times it would be like the public department site. So the department, your department, your HR, and you have public-facing content. When I say public, I mean company-wide. And so you have a communication site in SharePoint in your intranet, and that's where you're putting all of that like public-facing information, so that all employees in all departments can come there and get that information. On the team and project collaboration side, everyone is going to be either an owner or an editor. So there really isn't a concept in Teams specifically of like readers. And we'll talk a little bit about, with that SharePoint team site, how we might be able to accomplish something. But just overall, the purpose is that everyone is collaborating. Everybody who has access to this item, this team, all are able to collaborate on it together. You share documents, have conversations, and even manage tasks related to a specific team or project. One good example, kind of like on the other side, we talked about the public department side. A great example for this would be like the internal department site. So let's say HR, they have that public-facing information, but then they also have information that they're working on that's just for HR. That might end up being something that's better utilized in Teams, because typically they're all going to be collaborating on that together. They're going to be having conversations around that, maybe tracking tasks and things like that. So they can do all of that from within the Teams interface. All right. So what do you guys think about the functions, and is that kind of in line with what you're used to? So and I have a delay, so unfortunately I'll have to have a couple of pauses here as I wait for you guys to kind of catch up with where I am. Let's see. So Claire says we use classic SharePoint team site for sharing project content because of the team's permissions. So the funny thing with that, though, is you can actually, we're going to talk about that. You could utilize the SharePoint team site that is built, that gets created behind the team, and actually give permissions, like read permissions and things like that. So we can I'll show that in a few minutes, but just wanted to kind of mention that is an option, so you don't have to use the classic one. Let's see. And I think you guys are having a conversation about dynamic groups. I can kind of go back. Oh, we're talking about the org-wide stuff, yeah. All right, so let me go ahead and move this forward. So we just mentioned that, so let's talk about it a little bit more. Let's dive into this. So the SharePoint team site. When you are in Microsoft Teams and you click Create Team, automatically, behind the scenes, a SharePoint team site, a modern one, is created. And it's connected to that team in Microsoft Teams. On the other side, let's say if you're in SharePoint and you go to create a SharePoint team site, the team is kind of basically what happens behind the scenes is when you create that SharePoint team site, it creates everything it needs for the actual team in Microsoft Teams. But you actually have to click an extra button to kind of launch that team, so you would see it. So, but either way, it's just a little bit of a different interface. But either way, the point is that a Microsoft team is, in Microsoft Teams, you're looking at the front end interface, a special kind of interface that's placed on top of content that is stored in a SharePoint team site. So they are really truly one and the same. They're interconnected. So as you work with files and things like that inside of your Microsoft team, those files are stored in a library inside of that SharePoint team site. So those two things are connected, and it's usually, there are certainly excuse me, cases where things might be a little bit different, but I would say for the most part, that's kind of just the idea that you want to keep. That's kind of the thought, right? Is that I have a team in Microsoft Teams. There is a SharePoint team site that is behind this, and that's pretty much going to, most cases, that's going to be the situation. The actual, if you were to visit the SharePoint team site that your Microsoft team is connected to, you will see that there is a documents library that's automatically created on that site. And in that library, that is where your channel folders and your files are stored. So you'll still see them in Teams. They're just kind of being stored in that library, and you can also access them from that library if needed. If you are using the Microsoft Teams application, the SharePoint team site might not be something that you use regularly. So if you're in Microsoft Teams, it's what you're familiar with, it's what you like to use to kind of work with the files and do different things, you may never actually go to that SharePoint team site. And that's actually pretty common. That's why a lot of people don't even realize that they exist for quite a while. But just, it's good to know that if it does come up, that's why it's there. Like if you are looking through your admin center in SharePoint and you see all these, sites, it's good to understand like where they're coming from. And the big thing with that, I'm so sorry. The big thing with that is that you just don't want to delete it. So you don't want to delete that SharePoint team site. You want to just let it be. Even if you're not going to utilize it from that side, if from that interface, you still want to kind of let it stay there. Because again, it's almost like the back end, if you will, of the team. And a use case. So what is a use case for if using that SharePoint team site? So actually like visiting the interface and utilizing it from the SharePoint side. It could be a couple of different reasons. It really just depends on, what the team is and what the kind of content they have. It could be that they, want, on the SharePoint side, maybe they have people that will be able to read the content that they're working on in Microsoft Teams, but not be able to like edit it or even be able to work with it within the Teams interface. So maybe they have like, files in some of their, their channel folders or whatever, and they want people to be able to go through the SharePoint interface to kind of look at those files and read them, but not be a part of the team. And so that's what it says here. The use case, we need to have people access the content, but not be an editing member of the team or in Microsoft Teams. And so we can do that with the SharePoint team site. So let me go ahead and hop over to another browser really quick. So I have a site here called Marketing Team. And of course it's going to be extremely slow. Bear with me for a second. I'll go ahead and look at questions while it's figuring itself out. All right, so let's see. Yeah, so Lisa, we tell users to put public access on the intranet SharePoint sites and their own department access files on their team. Yeah, that's perfect. That's what I would recommend as well. And then you guys are talking about, instead of, if you don't have an org-wide team, how you could use a public team instead. And yeah, that's definitely, I think there's a couple of features that are different between org-wide and public. But overall, you could definitely accomplish what you need with a public team for the most part. I'm just taking a look at some questions here. Yep. All right, perfect. All right, so I think Mark asked, what about extra document libraries? We're actually going to get to that in a few minutes. Okay, so we're in the SharePoint team site. I'm accessing this directly. I just went into SharePoint and went directly to this site. Obviously, if I'm in Teams over here, I can always get to the SharePoint site by clicking the ellipsis. And then going in, open in SharePoint. You actually see that in a couple of different areas, but that is one easy way to open the SharePoint site. So back to my scenario, you kind of we mentioned like I have marketing, right? And marketing has, they have their owners and members in their Microsoft team. And they're in Microsoft Teams. They're actually in the application and they're working on files and they're doing different stuff in there. the problem that they have is that they want some people, like maybe they have like a subset of, like the sales team, for example. They work with the sales team a lot. So they want the sales team to be able to get to their content that they store in Microsoft Teams, but they never want the sales team to be able to edit that content. And they don't want them in like their conversations and all the other stuff that you see in Teams. They just want them to get to the files. So all of the files that they are working on and that they're creating are going to be stored here in the documents library. So whenever they create a channel, it's going to create a folder here. We'll talk more about channels in a little bit. And then any of the files or folders or anything that they're creating, they're also going to get stored here. So as they work on this content, update it in Teams, it's just getting updated here. Kind of the same concept as like you have OneDrive and then you have that information kind of synced to your computer. Those two things are connected. So as they're updating stuff in Teams, it's automatically updating it here as well. So what they could do is they obviously have their membership, right? So we go to members here. This is the actual Office or Microsoft 365 group that is running their team. So they have members and owners inside of this team. But from the SharePoint site, they can actually share just the SharePoint site. So just the SharePoint site with the sales team if they wanted to. And the way that they would do that is they would come to the SharePoint site, they would go to site permissions, and they would do this instead of add members, they'd click this drop down and do share site only. And then from here, they can go ahead, I'm going to just use, I think I have Laura, I have another person named Lauren. And then I can go ahead and give this person read access. And then when they have read access, they are, let me go ahead and see that. And I think that person I might have to do a different user. I think that's an external user, so they're not going to show up yet. So let me try another one, share site only. I'll just do Greg. Okay. So with Greg, I'm going to give him read access only. I'm not going to send him an email. I'm going to go ahead and add him. Yeah, there he is. So what that does is Greg is not part of the Microsoft 365 group. So he is literally just being given read access to this team site here. If he goes into Microsoft Teams, he's not going to see the marketing team there because he's not been given access to that. He's literally just been given access to this site as a reader. So that way he can come to this site, he can go to the documents library, and he can get access to read all of that content that they're working on inside of Teams. So that is one really good use case for the SharePoint team site. Other than that, you may not ever even need to access this. But if you do have people that you want to, a subset of people that you want to be able to read the content that you're working on in Teams, that would be one easy way to kind of grant them that access. And then you're not having to build a separate site, you're not having to do anything, you can just have them in this site, and then your actual owners and editors, they could just be working on things in Teams like they're used to, and then that person can come in here and get that information when they need it. Again, that was site permissions from the team site, and then instead of doing add members, you do share site only. So just wanted to point out that use case. That's a pretty good use case, and that's one that I commonly see, again, especially with teams like this, right, where marketing and sales work so closely. So obviously the entire anything that marketing creates for the entire organization might be out on their SharePoint communication site on the intranet, but any of the stuff that they're just working on, they may have a subset of things that they want to, have the sales team work on with them or look at with them. They can do that here. And you can do more than just read. That's the common option. But you can also do share site only. Just want to point this out. You can do share site only, and then if I type in Greg again, I can do edit. And that means that he can edit the content here, but he still is not going to be in the Microsoft team. So he's still not in the conversations and the tasks and other stuff we're doing there. He's just being able to edit the files from the SharePoint side. So if you needed him to do that, you could do that. And of course, just like any SharePoint, if you're familiar with SharePoint permissions, you could even set that at a library. You could add him in a library or folder level, that kind of thing, if you needed to. All right, so let me go ahead. I'm going to look at questions because I know we have a good bit of discussion. And it says, does an org-wide team automatically add or remove members from Azure or somewhere? I think An org-wide team just goes off of like I believe it goes off like the kind of like the everyone group. I'm not exactly sure what group it's using, but it utilizes that kind of same thing so that you don't have to, like, if somebody's removed from AD, they're not going to be in that org-wide team anymore. Let's see. So Claire says we have the opposite problem. They want them in the front end, but want to restrict some content from some of them in the back end. So they want them, I guess, Claire, they want them in teams, but you'll have to explain that a little bit, Claire. Kind of explain, like, say, like, teams versus SharePoint, because that way I don't know what you're talking about. So they want them in teams, but they don't want them in SharePoint? Is that what you're kind of saying? And I can kind of answer that. All right. Let's see. The share site only put them in a group or just create a sharing link? So share site only puts them in the SharePoint site group. So not like the Microsoft 365 group that runs the team and everything. It's just that it's a site group that's just on that SharePoint site. That's what it puts them in. So it's when you go to site permissions, like if you look at a communication site, it has them too. It has site owners, site members, site visitors. So it puts them into that group. And so Ava says, sounds dangerous to me to share site only with permission to edit. It really just depends. Obviously there's situations where it's extremely important that they have that and they don't want them in the team. That's typically why you have that. I mean, everything is dangerous, honestly. You can easily, delete and give it access to things that you shouldn't. It's really just a situational thing and training that will help with that. So yeah, they want the chatty stuff and want to restrict folders or libraries in the SharePoint site. So I would think that's more of like a private channel type thing, Claire. That would be like what I would remember. We're talk about that in a few minutes. But it almost sounds like that might be like more of what they're looking for, is they might want a private channel. That way in the general channel, they could have like chats and things like that. And then they would have private channels where they would have more secure content that they would be keeping from the rest of the team. So that might be more of what you're talking about. But I can kind of show that too. All right. Let's see. Let me go ahead and pop out of here real quick. So that's just a little bit about the SharePoint team site. Again, the biggest takeaway with that is going to be that SharePoint team site is connected to the Microsoft team. And that is, that's just the biggest thing to know, right? Like if you're kind of wondering, well, what's the difference between a SharePoint team site and Teams? Just kind of know that in 99% of the time, those two things are connected, and that it's basically one way of seeing the same content that you're working on in Microsoft Teams and utilizing it. And again, that use case I gave where you might need to have readers that you don't want in the team. So organizing content in SharePoint, we're typically used to organizing content into libraries. And I mean within a site. Within one site, we're typically used to organizing content into libraries, lists, or pages. And then in Microsoft Teams, within a Microsoft team, we create channels. So that is the kind of the different terminology that we'll see. So in a SharePoint site, we're pretty familiar, again, with libraries, lists, or pages. And then in Microsoft Teams, again, we're going to utilize channels. And let me go. I think I have some more discussion here. So Claire says that it creates another SharePoint site with a private team. Yes, it does. But, I mean, what's the problem with that, I guess my question would be. It says here, private channel won't work because they have to still be member of the team, which gives them by default edit permissions on SharePoint site. Private channel won't work because they have to still be member of the team. Well, they wouldn't be a member of that channel, though. Right? I mean, I guess I'm just misunderstanding. You would have to go into SharePoint and start stripping permissions. I mean, it just depends, right? Because if it's a private channel, they're not going to be, that's a separate site. So they're not going to be able to get to that SharePoint site. So that, I don't know what you mean there, Jonathan, sorry. Let's see. Yes, it does create another SharePoint site, and private channel does not have all the features as regular channel. What features are you seeing missing, Darlene? Let me know. I'm not sure of any. And then Amanda, that's the route I went with. Okay. But yeah, just let me know what you guys are talking about with that, because I'm not sure I fully understand. All right, so channels. Okay, so channels are dedicated sections within a team to keep content organized with specific topics, projects, or disciplines. The files saved within a channel are stored in the document library on the connected SharePoint team site. So we just talked about that. And then whenever you create a channel, it's going to automatically become a folder in that document library that we talked about, except for private channels, which we'll talk about in a second. But any regular channels that you create, they're going to have a folder in that document library, and that's where their files are going to be stored. And I'll kind of demonstrate that in the example team that I'm working with. And you can think of Teams as the front-end interface for the SharePoint team site. So let's take a look. So some things to ask when creating a channel. I think I've had a lot of people get confused as to when to just like build some additional folders in their general channel, which is what the team comes with. And then also kind of wonder, when would be the best use case for creating, just a separate channel. So these are a couple things I think of. Will there be conversations around the topic? So whatever the thing is you're thinking about creating a channel for, whether it's a project or a specific thing that you're doing, that you can, will there actually be conversations, around that topic? Will you actually be, having chats and things like that that are just relative to that topic and that topic alone? That's one. Another one will be, will you have anything other than documents for the topic? Will there be just more than files? If you just have files, then it might be not necessary to have a separate channel. It might be just something that you create a folder for in your general channel. But if you're going to have other things you foresee in the future that there's, other needs, that might be a good reason to create a channel. And then, speaking of those needs, one of the big ones might be task management. So do you want to have kind of separate tasks and task tracking, around that specific topic or project? And of course, you guys probably have seen some of the tabs, but there is a lot of different tabs you can create, so it's good to kind of have an idea of what kind of content or what kind of things you might be wanting to do around that topic or project. And we'll take a look. Let's go take a look really quick. I'm going to hop back over to my team here. So in my Project AA team, I just have a general channel right now. And then in my general channel, I have files. We'll talk a little bit more about this. So if I had again, I'm trying to consider whether I should create a channel for a project, or sub-project that I'm doing. The big thing to consider is, do I have more than just files? Because if I just have files, I may want to go ahead and just keep it easy and create a folder for that subtopic just right within this files area. But if I think there's going to be conversations around this that I want to kind of keep separated, if I think there's going to be like different people that might want to work in there, if a need for a private channel, then that might be different. If I think there's going to be tasks or other types of things going on around that, then that's probably when I would create a channel. So for a folder, I would just do new folder, and I'm going to call this sub project B. And then for the way that would look, so if I go over to open in SharePoint, you'll see that when I created that, if I go to my documents library, I see that there is a general channel folder. So that represents the folder for the channel. And then inside of there, I have that sub project B. So you can see as I create things in the Teams interface, it automatically creates those things over in that library. So I have that, and I can go ahead and start putting files there and then just kind of store them within the general channel. But then if I determine that I actually wanted to have conversations and things like that around subproject B, and I actually need a channel for it, I can go ahead and create a channel. So I'm going to create a channel, and we're just going to use we're not going to do private right now. We'll just do the regular one. We'll call it sub project. Whoop, it'd help if I could type. Sub project B. And I'm just going to do standard and allow everyone to see it. And then that creates subproject B. And so here I have my own posts and files here. So then if I under subproject B, I could maybe create folders around that. So I could say like under subproject B, we're going to have project, or we'll say training documents. Training documents. So now if I go take a look at that SharePoint site, and I refresh. So now I have, under documents, I have general and subproject B here. And if I go into subproject B, I see that training documents folder that I created. So as you can see, you know, the actual files, now this doesn't apply to like the conversations and the other tabs that we might add in, but the actual files that I'm managing here, it's kind of building this file structure over in the SharePoint site automatically for you. Again, you may never need to go here and see this. It may just not even be a need. There might not be a requirement. But this is, again, where I could add in a reader to this site who could get to this and not be in the team. All right. All right, let me go ahead and hop back over here. So that's just a little bit of an explanation. I'll kind of stop and let's take a look at some more questions. I know there's a lot. I may not be able to keep up. It looks like there's a lot of conversation happening. All right, let's see. Let's see. A biggest question or issue I will be looking to archive off Team SharePoint. Is there overhead for a team? Keeping things forever, Send Canyon, Echo Voice. So, Doug, you're talking about archiving. I think Laura gave you a link just kind of on like the size storage, the storage limits and things like that. I think there are ways to kind of remove that, but archiving is kind of a whole other topic that we'd have to look into a little bit more. Let's see. I would like to add all employees as a group to edit a team SharePoint library. Is that something that sounds possible? So what you would probably do, it looks like somebody... Yeah, see, it's kind of hard because I think some of these things are being answered. So you know what? I think I'll just stop. If you guys, Laura, you just let me know if there's in the chat if I need to answer anything. It's kind of hard for me. I know you guys are kind of having some conversation as I'm talking, so I don't want to like re-answer things that have already been answered. So yeah, just kind of looking at the end here and see if there's any more recent ones. Jonathan says you also still have subproject B folder under general. Yes, I mean, obviously I do. I could delete that since I've now moved to actual channel situation. So I could just go back and delete that folder. Okay. Yeah, sorry guys. I'm going to keep moving. Hopefully you're getting your answers in the chat there. It's a little hard for me to do both right at the moment. So I'll circle back. All right, so let's talk about private channels. So channels are open to all team members by default. Or if you need a more select audience, they can be private. So obviously you saw in that last channel I created, it was standard, so it just automatically whoever had access to the team, they would also have access to that channel. But within that team, I can go ahead and create a private channel. And so private channels allow you to limit, communication and content and stuff like that to a subset of people. You can decide who gets added into that channel. It will actually prompt you to add the people that will need access to it. And then, yes, this is something that bothers a lot of people. Private channels will create and store content in their own separate SharePoint team site. So unlike the kind of the overall team site, the private channel is going to create its own separate SharePoint site. And that's really just from a permission standpoint. That was the best way Microsoft was able to do that. That's obviously a lot of people have a lot of opinions on that fact, but that's just kind of how it works right now. And unlike the overall SharePoint team site that we were talking about with that use case of having readers, we don't really recommend doing anything with the SharePoint team site that's created with a private channel. We really push people to just if you're using a private channel, just do anything with that private channel inside of Microsoft Teams, and just pretend like that SharePoint team site just doesn't even exist. The funny thing about that is you're not even going to see it as a SharePoint. If you're a SharePoint admin and you're in the admin center, you're not going to see that team site listed. The only way you get to that team site is from within the team, clicking on, the open in SharePoint button. And we just kind of overall, it's something you might want to tell your users too. Just don't make changes to that. Don't utilize that team site. Just do everything inside of Microsoft Teams. That's going to be the easiest thing. Eventually, that could change. I mean, I'm not sure, Microsoft might change how they're doing that. We all know how that goes. But for right now, that would just be our recommendation. It's just helpful to know that it is not that content, that private channel content is not going to be in your SharePoint team site. That's not where it's going to be stored. So it's just good to know that it's going to be in its own off somewhere else. So let's take a look at that really quickly. So under project A, so I'm going to do another sub-project here. And actually, I'll just do like a leadership. We'll do project leadership. So then here, I'm going to go ahead and do private and click create. And I can add people in. I'll just skip that for now. And then whoever I'd added in, and then you'll see the lock icon. You guys are probably all familiar with this, but that's the private site there. If I go over to my SharePoint site, and you'll see I'll refresh here, you see that there is not a new folder created for that, because again, it was created in its own private team site. But, don't worry about that team site right now. Just kind of deal with this and work within the private channel itself. And you can add people. And again, those people that have access to the team are not automatically going to get access to this. You have to add in people directly. Let's see. All right. Let's see, it looks like Laura kind of pointed out some questions. Let me circle back up there and see. Oh, Carol, great. Hey, Carol. All right, so good question. Let's see. Can you talk about when to create a channel in an existing team and when to create a new team? We have lots of teams and people are complaining about the number of teams. I would say, the biggest thing about creating another team is if there's a lot of, I guess, if it's like a different group of people is the biggest thing, right? You might want, if it's a different group of people that's going to be editing and owning, then obviously that's one kind of big reason to create another team. And then really just how many channels and how those channels are kind of organized. So, if it's like the same group of people, but then, over here, they're more focused on, topic A, then over here they're more focused on topic B, and then they have like a bunch of like things underneath those topics, and that might be kind of a reason to have those things split into two different teams. There are somebody mentioned further down that with private teams, there is limitation to how many you can have, how many private teams you can have, or private channels. I'm so sorry, I keep saying that. How many private channels that you can have, but really it just kind of depends on the content. I know that's kind of a crappy answer, but I just really look at who is going to be on the team. Is it different? Is there any difference between the people? And then what is the stuff that they're working on? What are the different categories? And how many categories? Are there subcategories? And then that's kind of what I use to determine if they should be two teams and not just channels within a team. And they're complaining about the number of teams. So just one of the big things is pinning and hiding. There's also a search feature It's something that I know we cover in our teams training, but you can, hide teams, you can pin teams. There's even like an option to kind of filter and search for them. So there's just a couple different little features there to show them that they can, to simplify what they're seeing in this interface here, because it is hard when you do have a very long list of teams here. So just kind of showing them the different ways that they can like pin, hide, things like that is usually helpful. All right. All right. So, like, if IT has a team, then there are areas of IT that use a subset of those people. I was thinking sub-teams could be private channels instead of creating a lot of teams with the same people. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good, could be a good option. It just depends, I guess, with the sub-teams in IT, to answer your question, if they're going to need, like, their own channels and stuff like that. Again, like I was kind of talking about with Carol's question. But I think that could definitely be an option that you could do with private channels. And then it says, what are the difference between Microsoft Teams links and SharePoint links? Lisa asked that. To be honest, I'm not sure. I guess that's just the link. It will bring them to Microsoft Teams versus the SharePoint site. That would be my assumption, but I'm not quite sure. Can admin see private channel sites via PowerShell? That's a good question. I don't actually know. I would imagine the Teams admin could probably see all the stuff kind of behind the scenes, even if they're not able to like access the content. But I don't know for sure. So sorry about that. And then Tony mentioned them 30 private channel max. Thanks for mentioning that. So Carolyn, if you are a SharePoint admin and someone creates a private channel, can you see the channel's SharePoint site in the SharePoint Admin Center? No, you can't. I think we answered that, but I think you cannot see it in the Admin Center. How does that work for offboarding? Do the private channel's SharePoint sites just live forever, and can an admin make themselves an owner like you can for the team? That's a good question. I don't know if... let's see... So it looks like Tony said that you can see them in the Teams admin. So I guess that would be probably where you would have to end up working with them. But the SharePoint site that it creates, no. You do not see that in the Admin Center. Oh, and some of the limits of private channels are around using things like the Microsoft 365 group. That makes sense, yeah. So like Planner and things like that don't apply to the private channel. But for files, I think the situation earlier, we were talking about files specifically, like library content, so that would be a good use case for a private channel. But obviously, if you did need like your own, depending on what you were utilizing, it might not be the best use case. Okay, so I think I got through a good bit of this. Let's kind of keep moving forward. What makes up a channel? Posts. So on every channel, it's going to start with, typically with especially the general channel is going to start with your posts, which are your conversations, your files, again, connected to that SharePoint team site document library, and then the wiki, which is just an area where you can kind of have general notes, meeting minutes, and things like that. Pretty open-ended. So the reason I mentioned that is because one of the things that we could do with the SharePoint piece is some integration. So we kind of talked about just like the general, obviously as you create a channel and how it creates a folder and that documents library in the team site. But there may be times where whether it's your SharePoint team site or it's just your communication site or whatever, where you may have content in addition to that library. So you might have other libraries, you might have lists, you might have pages, and some of those things that you want to also display in your team and Teams so that they don't have to constantly go back to SharePoint to get to them. So you could do that. You can kind of do it from either way. So if you're in your SharePoint team site, you've created that first and you're working there first, and you're about ready to kind of make a team from that. So we'll go over to my site here. So marketing team here. They don't actually have, it exists out there, it's just not where they can visually see it, but they don't actually have a team available yet. We're going to use this little link down here in the bottom left to create that. Before I do that, though, I have one list I've created called issue tracker, and I'm also going to create another document library here called training documents. And so from here, I'm going to go ahead and click Add Microsoft Teams and do Continue. And then I can select from this site, I can select other things that would be created as different tabs in my general channel. So I can say I want, so the documents library is obvious, it's already done, that's files. And then here I can say I also want this training documents and I want this issue tracker, this list, to also be added in Teams. And you can see I can kind of filter by pages, lists, or document libraries if I had a bunch. And then I can go ahead and do Add Teams. It's getting that created. Let's see. Go back over. All right, so then I could go to, here's my marketing team now in Teams. I go to General, and then I can see here I have Issue Tracker, which is a list that I had in SharePoint, and then I see training documents. So now, in addition to just my files, which is kind of that general content, I also have those two things that are brought over from my SharePoint site. So I can go that way. If we also kind of go back to the PowerPoint, we'll talk a little bit about this. We can also, if the team already exists, which is probably for the most part with people that are watching this, then you can actually do this from Teams too, and you don't have to do that right even when the team has already been created. So you can add a tab and use the SharePoint option, and you can basically do exactly what I just did, which is select things from the SharePoint team site or any SharePoint site that you have access to. So a good use case for that would be, let's say you actually have like some polished pages on your communication site or a library on your communication site that you also want to like park as a tab inside of your team. You can use this feature to do that as well. And so if I go back to Teams here, and I go to Project A, I'll go to the general channel, I could do Add here, and then SharePoint. Actually hit the right one, the pages. And they actually break it down, which is kind of interesting. I usually just use the one called SharePoint, but they actually break it down so you can choose a document library, a page, like you can go, or a list, like you can go directly to those things. But you can even just go through SharePoint here. And then from Project A, I could pick something from the Project A site here, or I could do any SharePoint site. And then I'll go ahead, I'm going to go get my hub site really quick and just get some kind of page I have out there. Paste in the link for my communication site. And there we go, right there. So now I can have that page kind of showing up as well. And of course, that can be any page. But I can also go ahead and let's see. Looks like I can even edit it from here as well because I have access to do so. If I didn't have access to edit, if I was just a reader, then it would just show up, view only there. But yeah, that's another way you can go through there. You can go through, again, the document, if you just need a document library, if you just need a page, if you just need a list. You can kind of use these apps. These are integrated with SharePoint so that you can go select those things and have them show up as separate tabs, like we did with when we kind of went through the other interface. All right. So you can kind of see what that looks like. So that is really good just in case you do have, if there is some in your organization, they're like, well, I do have my private department stuff in Teams, but I also would love to see this library that I keep in my communication site in Teams as well because I don't want to have to go to two places. That would be a really good way of doing that because they can kind of work on the content that they would have in their communication site. They can work on that from within, this interface, but it's still, it still actually lives on the communication site so everybody can see it. But that just kind of makes things a little bit easier, gives them some shortcuts and stuff like that. If they kind of complain about having those two sites, the communication site versus the Microsoft team. And then finally, I always like to kind of point this out. So with your intranet, you can kind of surface your intranet as an app in Teams. So your intranet, your whatever your main site for your intranet is, you would want to make it a home site, which is typically a PowerShell that you would run to do that. And then you can go through the process. Laura actually did a session on this, a power hour on this, and so I can link to that. There's also resources that I'll put out there that Microsoft has written really good documentation on it. The PowerShell is a little tricky, but you basically have to run a long PowerShell, and you can put in the URL, you put in like the little icon, you put in the name of your intranet, and then what it does is, as you can see in this screenshot from Microsoft, up here on the left-hand side, you can see this little app on the app bar in Teams. That would be your intranet. Excuse me. So the intranet would still live in SharePoint. It would still be on a communication site, but it would be shown here as well. So that way, if there are people that just use Teams and don't really venture over to SharePoint, they can still get access and kind of look at your overall intranet, and be able to navigate through it and things like that right from within Microsoft Teams. All right. So let's go ahead and look at some more questions. I'll kind of scroll through here. Let's see. Claire, I think you can use search. There's a search box. I think they answered that already. For the she was asking about being able to find topics and stuff in chat. So yeah, there are searches all throughout Teams, even in the posts area and things like that. You can search. The search in Teams, yeah, it's really good. It works really well. Let's see. All right, I think that's it. I think pretty much everybody, if I missed any of your questions, feel free to, I'll hang out for a few minutes, but feel free to post them again. Excuse me, sorry. And I can answer them. So having issues with third-party integration tools and Teams. Yeah, I've seen some little weirdness with some of those tabs before. Some of those third-party tabs, not the ones that are built into SharePoint like I was talking about, but like some of the other tabs, I've seen some weird behavior. And besides just kind of talking to your vendor of the third-party tool, I'm not really sure what to do with that one. And then what improvements for Teams are on the horizon? Actually, not sure. I would say check out Ignite next week. And I'm sure they'll have a good bit of announcements on those things. I know that I've seen a lot of stuff with meetings. That was in the Champions call this week. They talked a good bit about some of the meeting stuff and feedback stuff around that. But yeah, definitely I would look into Ignite next week. I think it's next week. Correct me if I'm wrong. All right, I think that's it. I'll hang out for another second. I'll be in the chat too. Making sure I'm kind of taking my time here so that you guys catch up with me. Because I know there's a little bit of a delay. Let me go ahead and switch back to Infinity. Darlene posted the roadmap. Thanks, Darlene. Aha! Microsoft Ignite is next week. See, I know stuff. All right. I think that's it. I'll definitely be in the chat for a few minutes. You guys have a great day, and happy Halloween, and we'll see you not next week, but maybe the week after. I'd have to check the calendar. But we'll see you soon. Have a good one.